A Targaryen, alone in the world. It's a terrible thing.
For most of his life, Jon Snow has only been Jon Snow. It was most commonly believed that he was the bastard son of Eddard Stark and a woman who was not his wife. There were a lot of possibilities about who Jon's mom was in the past, from a woman named Wylla, a wet nurse from Starfall, who Ned even claims is Jon's mother in the first book, to Ashara Dayne, the sister of Sir Arthur Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, who Ned had a crush on and even danced with at Harrenhal. Regardless, in the books, Jon's origins are still a mystery, but they do still play a large part in his character, as he desperately wonders where he comes from and searches for a place where he belongs. And for his entire life, while he remained ignorant to the truth, he still got to be raised with one part of his family, the Starks, even if his role within this family was false. So it's kind of made me wonder over the past couple of days, how the story could have changed if Jon had grown up with the other half. What if he'd been raised with what remained of the Targaryen family instead, with Viserys and Daenerys across the Narrow Sea? Let's find out. It's a warm day in the Red Mountains of Dorne. The skies are clear and the sun beats down overhead. Screams fill the afternoon air from inside the Tower of Joy, as Gerald Hightower, Oswell Went, and Sir Arthur Dayne stand sentry outside. News had reached them some time ago of the fall of Prince Rhaegar, the fall of his family, and King Aerys. The war had been over for some weeks, and now his stag had sat himself where a dragon should be. Even in the face of his death, however, these men hold to their oaths to Prince Rhaegar, and his orders to remain here, to watch over Lady Lyanna as she gives birth to their child. The hours pass and Lyanna's screams only get louder and louder, until eventually they fall silent, replaced by those of another, much smaller but still loud in its own way. The Kingsguard look amongst themselves, knowing full well what this means and how important this child is going to be. Gerald Hightower ascends the steps to the Tower of Joy, leaving his companions to keep watch. As he enters the room, he's greeted by the sight of a lifeless Lyanna, and the nursemaid Wylla holding a bundle in her arms. He sighs at the tragic sight and asks Wylla if she spoke a final word. She has to go home, the woman tells him, and the older man sighs once more before inquiring about the baby. A boy, he learned, the last son of Prince Rhaegar, and, as it stood, one of the last remaining Targaryens left in the realm. In any other world, the birth of this child might have been seen as a great joy, something to be celebrated, even with the questionable circumstances that surrounded his birth. But with the prince slain and his family scattered, this was a dangerous time, especially with the usurper who was all but eager to wipe out any who might pose a threat to his new rule. Gerald takes the boy carefully in his arms. So small, yet so important. He asks if the Lady Lyanna had enough time to give him a name. Aemon, Wylla tells him, before he hands him back and heads to his sworn brothers outside. Gerald tells them that in spite of their prince's orders, it's imperative that they leave this place as soon as possible. Lady Lyanna has unfortunately passed, and it wouldn't be long before people came looking for them, if the search hadn't begun already. As it stands, ensuring the safety of Rhaegar's remaining son was of paramount importance. While they discuss their next moves, they also ponder what to do with the remains of Lady Lyanna. They could bury her here, but Gerald does relay that her final wish was to return home. But taking her there wasn't exactly something that they could do if they wanted to avoid the usurper's companions. Arthur suggests that they send a letter notifying someone of her whereabouts, but only once they were safely gone with the young prince. This way, her brother Lord Stark would be able to find her, and she wouldn't be left to rot in a foreign land for too long. Of course, they would omit the details of Lyanna's death, and the birth of the child. If that were to happen, then it was of no question to them that the usurper would employ every man he could to hunt down Rhaegar's last son. His sworn brothers seem to agree, and set about the burial of Lyanna, though they make sure the grave isn't too deep so recovery isn't an issue. The three knights then set off to the home of the Sword of the Morning, Starfall, ancestral seat of House Dayne. Also, like the Tower of Joy, it's settled near the Red Mountains of Dorne, so the trek there is not very grand. Before this, they did discuss the possibility of seeking refuge with the Martells, but ultimately decided against it. Their stay in Dorne could not be prolonged any more than necessary, and if by some chance word got back to the usurper, it could drag Dorne into another conflict. Then there was the more obvious issue of Aemon. The Dornish had no knowledge of him, or the complex situation in which he was spawned. They might not take kindly to his presence given all that happened with Elia and her children. Best not risk anything. They lay low at Starfall for a time, as Arthur's relatives have no desire to turn him, or his companions, over to Robert Baratheon. While here, they formulate their next steps, with the knowledge that they can't stay here forever, as eventually the usurper will come knocking when it's clear they can't be found in any of the other kingdoms. And when Lord Stark finds the Tower of Joy, without any of them there and only his sister's body. But they take advantage of this moment of reprieve and take the time to hear about the more recent happenings of the world. During this time, they learn that after the fall of the city, Prince Viserys, along with his mother Rhaela, had escaped to Dragonstone with the remainder of the Targaryen fleet, with the usurper enlisting the help of his brother, currently making plans to build a new fleet to take them captive. This makes it obvious what their next course of action needs to be. The king may be dead, but their vows remained, and their cloaks were still white. It was their duty to look after the remnants of the House of the Dragon, and reunite the son of Rhaegar with the last of his family, and keep them all from harm. Within days, the 3 knights and infant boys set off from Starfall and find a ship that will take them to the island, paying extra so the sailors will be discreet and not sell them out. They arrive on the ancient seat sometime later, hoisting a white flag to show that they mean no harm. When confronted by the garrison, the 3 knights let themselves be known, and Willem Darry recognizes them almost immediately, and welcomes them to the island. Their presence here causes the man to feel a bit relieved, that hope was not lost for them, as they were still loyal and willing to aid them and hold to their vows. Though amidst this joy to see these brave men alive, there is also questioning at the sight of the young boy that they carry with them. But before they explain, Gerald Hightower says that a meeting with the Queen is paramount. The men are taken to the Queen and her son with haste afterwards. Rhaela, who has yet to give birth, given that it's still the early days of their exile on Dragonstone, is surprised to see them all. A mix of emotions comes over her at the sight of these men. On the one hand, there's relief that they survived and remained loyal, returning to their service to help keep her and the children safe. But on the other hand, there's also questioning and a bit of anger. Where were they this entire time her family was being slaughtered? She would shed no tears for Aerys Targaryen, but why were they not by his side when a Lannister put a sword through their king's back? Where were they when her son was fighting the usurper alone? When he was dying on the Trident? Their presence might have saved his life, but they were in the wind. What about when her grandchildren were being killed by Lannister men, too? Where were they then? These are the questions she intends to ask when they seek an audience with her in Dragonstone's throne room. But soon she's left wondering even more at the sight of a child, cradled in the arms of the Lord Commander. Rhaela rises from the throne with her son Viserys beside her, who has rarely left her side since their flight from the capital city. The two of them approach the 3 Kingsguard, who kneel in respect, each offering an apology for not being here with them sooner. Rhaela demands that they rise as she has questions for them all, her eyes glued to the infant in Gerald's arms. For some strange reason, she can already suspect what the answer is going to be in regards to him. After all, why else would they have brought him here? Luckily for the widowed queen, all of her questions have the same answer. The Sword of the Morning details that the reason they had not been with the prince, or in the capital city with the king, was that Prince Rhaegar had instructed them to do otherwise. For a long time, they'd stood beside King Aerys and averted their eyes to the truth of the man, citing duty mattered more than his cruelty. But honor could only allow them to stomach so much over the years, and when Prince Rhaegar discussed with them plans for change after all the horror they'd been made to witness, they'd swiftly agreed. They explain everything. Their time at the Tower of Joy, and Rhaegar's relationship with Lady Stark. They were ordered to safeguard her, and by extension, this piece of the future. The young boy they call Aemon, last son of Prince Rhaegar and heir to the Iron Throne. Young Viserys looks on curiously for a moment, before tugging on his mother's skirt and asking if he can hold the baby. She allows this and nods to Gerald, who carefully hands Aemon to his uncle. This reveal leaves his mother stunned and conflicted, however. Her life had not been a happy one, at least not since she married Aerys, but that didn't erase the pain of losing everything. Her oldest child, her daughter-in-law, her grandchildren, and now to be given confirmation that it was indeed her son's actions that helped cause their downfall. Now she had evidence of it right here in her son's arms. It was a lot to think on, though she doesn't hold it against the boy. He didn't ask to be born. The adults continue to converse. She states that she is aware of these knights' loyalty to her son, but as it stands, this child is not the future king of Westeros. If the circumstances of his birth didn't call his legitimacy as a Targaryen prince into question, given how no one of real importance knew or acknowledged Rhaegar's annulment and remarriage, there was the simple fact that after Rhaegar's death, and before the fall of the city, King Aerys had named Viserys his heir, forgoing Rhaegar's line. It hadn't been something that she agreed with, but there was nothing she could do to stop it, and she herself had named Viserys as the true king after King's Landing fell. Though that had mainly been because, up until that point, he was the only living male Targaryen left. Even with that being said, however, even if she was against it and had a desire to set things right, it made little sense to name this boy heir. Aemon standing within the family was something to be scrutinized, and as it stood, word was bound to have spread ages ago of Viserys' new status as king, or at the very least, most of the realm automatically assumed and expected him to be king with the death of Aerys. If we were to raise this boy, who one could argue is the reason this war started, it could sow division, the queen says. Maybe not within the family, though that could never be ruled out depending on how Viserys grew, but the realm. It might sound strange given the situation they're in, but all they had to do was think about how disorganized it would seem to those on the mainland. If Viserys was named king with one breath, then Rhaegar's unknown son with a woman promised to someone else in another, it was bound to cause problems. What supporters they had left could be divided. Their foundation could be seen as unstable if they prop up one king after another, this one younger than the last, and only served to drive more people towards the usurper. He might not have been a Targaryen, but he was a proven leader, and a great warrior. He seemed strong, much stronger than a boy and a baby. So, as it stands, Viserys Targaryen, third of his name, is the rightful king of the Seven Kingdoms. Though, with Aemon being the only other Targaryen left, he'll be his heir. Though, the queen wonders how long that status will last given her pregnancy. By maintaining her son's position, any potential brother could supplant him in that regard as well. Though even with that being said, as the months pass on, they do their best to keep the identity of Aemon a closely guarded secret on Dragonstone, due to the belief that if the knowledge that Rhaegar had a child with the woman once promised to Robert Baratheon got out, it would embolden his efforts and hasten his plans to capture the island. While he was already planning to do so now, and it would take time before his fleet was fully prepared, they didn't want to risk anything, any drastic measures that he might come up with in order to deal with them. As time goes on, though, Rhaella takes well to her grandson and can often be seen carrying him around the halls of Dragonstone as her own belly grows. She often speaks to him of his father Rhaegar and her desire for him to be strong and kind like he was, though the infant can't understand her. Despite the events that led to his birth, she can't bring herself to alienate the only thing that remained of her first son, who, like them, was all alone in the world, without a father or a mother. She does her best to fill that role, even if the infant won't have any recollection of this. Many times she tells her son Viserys that as the oldest, it's his duty to protect his nephew and one day his sibling. He must be kind to them, look after them, like Rhaegar would have. It's her own little effort to ensure that he'll be a better person than his father. The young king seems to take well enough to that, but at times he does appear a bit jealous of the attention his mother gives to Aemon. It's strange, but if one were to look past the looming threat of Robert Baratheon, it seemed like a time of peace settled over the island. With some of the greatest knights in the realm to safeguard them and what remained of the Targaryen family in one place, and allowed to live in peace, things seem to be hopeful for the future. Though this notion of peace is quickly shattered in the coming months in a series of unfortunate events. A storm rattles the Isle of Dragonstone, wiping out what remains of the Targaryen fleet. In the throes of this, Queen Rhaella is faced with complications during the birth of her daughter Daenerys that ultimately proves fatal. With the queen dead and the fleet scattered, this is the perfect time for Stannis to make his move on the Targaryen children. Though before he can make his move on them, Willem Dari and the remaining Kingsguard go through with their plan to whisk away the children to safety. Their travels take them across the narrow sea to the free cities, Braavos in particular, where they seek refuge and make what life they can for the children. This, of course, does not go unnoticed, as back in King's Landing, Robert broods at this loss. Those who remain of the garrison in the Dragonstone are detained, brought back to King's Landing, and made to divulge what they know to the king and his hand, Jon Arryn. They want to know any and everything about the remaining Targaryens and where they might have gone, what information was important. It's during these talks where those left behind reveal that the queen had given birth to a daughter before they fled. And perhaps most importantly, Robert and his hand are told of the child, Aemon. At first, they take this to mean that the queen produced a set of twins, but as the explanation goes on, the truth becomes clear. The two are left stunned, and Robert Baratheon is furious. The idea that Rhaegar Targaryen had not only taken Lyanna and had his way with her, but sired a child on her made him all the more angry with his brother Stannis for not taking the island sooner. He wonders if Ned knew the truth. After all, he was the one to find Lyanna's body, and the Sword of the Morning had written him a letter disclosing her location. Though, as he never saw it himself, he begins to wonder if his best friend omitted any details. In his fury, he has half a mind to demand Ned's presence in King's Landing, and make him answer for it. But even in his suspicion and rage, Robert doesn't want to widen the already existing rift between the two of them, by implying that his best friend was a traitor to the throne that he just helped him win. Then there's also the part of him that wanted to believe that Ned knew nothing, and would never hide anything like this from him. So he opts out of questioning him, but Jon Arryn, his Hand of the King, does ponder if they should inform Ned of the child. After all, even if he did know nothing, this was his nephew. It's Dragonspawn, the king replies, like the rest of them. Even if this was the son of Lyanna, all Robert can see is another extension of Rhaegar. And in the absence of the specifics of their relationship, he's also led to believe that this child's conception was nefarious in nature as well. His sentiments are minimal, and he'd rather keep Ned out of the loop when it comes to this child's origins. He tells Jon Arryn that Aemon's identity did not matter, as it was unlikely that he would ever meet the boy to begin with. He couldn't see his best friend crossing the narrow sea to find this child, even if the truth did come out, nor would he or any other Baratheon allow him to set foot on Westeros while they held the throne. He was an enemy, a rival, and above all else, a Targaryen. He had nothing to do with Ned. This wasn't even mentioning his designs to truly be rid of the Targaryens forever. Ned had already been opposed to what happened with Elia Martell and her children. If he knew about Aemon and his unchanged desires, then the rift between them might never close. Though in spite of this, word would still spread of the third Targaryen child, but his true origins are still shrouded in mystery. Many in the realm still believe that he's the child of Queen Rhaela, and the brother to Daenerys and Viserys. Though for how long that story would hold, only time would tell. Across the narrow sea, however, the dragons find their den. A house with a red door and a lemon tree outside. It's here, in Braavos, that the three children are raised under the stout observation of Willem Darry, Arthur Dayne, Oswell Went, and Gerald Hightower. They do their best to keep a low profile here and not draw any unwanted attention, while they see to the safety of the children and prepare them for the future. Viserys, being the oldest at 8 years old, demands much of the knight's attention. Like it or not, whatever their views on the succession, the fact remained that Viserys was the oldest and would reach manhood far before his nephew. He could be prepared for the wars to come much sooner, and he would need to be, as the usurper was unlikely to sit idle as he grew. Responsibilities are divided between the four protectors of the prince, who teach him everything they can, from swordplay, horse riding, proper etiquette, the importance of political alliances, and making informed decisions. Their hope was that they could avoid producing another heiress, a man who mainly acted on his urges, no matter how vile. It's also for that reason that they try to leave enough time for Viserys to actually be a child where they can. Given all the stress and trauma he's endured for one so young, it would be very easy for cracks to start to form in him. So as much as they desire for him to be a king, they also want him to be the boy that he is. At least until the time comes for him to be something different. In these early years of exile, where the future seems uncertain, the royal family and their protectors receive an unexpected visitor in their home in Braavos. When it happens, Gerald Hightower and Oswell Went are in the midst of teaching the young king, taking him through basic sword stances and the like, when there's a knock on the door. Immediately, they usher the prince away into his room, and Oswell moves to the nursery where the youngest Targaryens are, while Arthur Dayne and Gerald move for the door. Given how unlikely they are to receive visitors here, they are rightfully very on edge. But Oberyn Martell has come a long way from Dorne to find them, at the behest of his older brother Doran. As he was someone familiar with the Free Cities, the Prince of Dorne thought it was best his brother came and found them, and considering his skills, he should be able to ward off any trouble if it came his way. Though, at the sight of the two White Cloaks, he says he's unsure if he can handle the Sword of the Morning and the White Bolt together, especially since he hadn't bothered to pack his spear. The Red Viper is allowed into the estate, and the men begin to talk. Arthur Dayne knows that he never expected to see Prince Oberyn here, or that Dorne would be so eager to find them after everything that happened during the rebellion, especially with how King Aerys slighted them so. Oberyn says that while the Dornish were a passionate people, any animosity that they held was towards King Aerys, not his children. Either way, the man was dead, and there were new kings now, one on the Iron Throne and another across the sea, stolen away in the night with what remained of his family. Oberyn gets to the point quick enough. He's come with an offer from his brother for the eldest Targaryen son. What happened to Elia and her children on the orders of Tywin Lannister, and in the favor of Robert, had left a very sour taste in their mouths, to say the least. Their blood boiled and demanded retribution. For that reason, the ruling Prince of Dorne offers a marriage pact, his eldest daughter, Princess Arianne Martell, for Viserys Targaryen. Should they agree, they will back his claim to the Iron Throne, and when the time came for him to return to his home, he would have the aid of their armies in reclaiming his birthright. He would get his crown, they would have their revenge, and above all, a Targaryen would rule with the Martell, as they should have with Elia and Rhaegar. They have little reason to refuse the offer, or suspect foul play was afoot. They knew how much Elia meant to Doran and Oberyn, and with so many of the great houses deferring to Robert now, it was unlikely that they would get any more offers like this anytime soon. After all, what sane man would favor a boy and infants over the man who broke the House of the Dragon? It sounds like a foolhardy scheme, and it's for that reason that the offer seems all the more authentic. So they agree, and Oberyn is pleased. But before he leaves, Oberyn asks to see the other two Targaryen children. News is spread across the Seven Kingdoms about Rhaella's pregnancy, and the two babes that accompanied Prince Viserys into exile. The Kingsguard and Willamdari are unsure at first, in fear of a negative reaction to the child that could cause Oberyn to make his older brother withdraw his support. But ultimately they know that Aemon's origins will be revealed sooner or later. And Dorne was going to have something to say about him regardless. They could only hope it wouldn't push them away. So Oberyn is allowed into the nursery where a young Aemon and Daenerys reside. At first, it's obvious the boy is not like the rest of his family, with his dark hair and eyes, in contrast to the typical Targaryen silver and purple. It doesn't take much for Oberyn to deduce the truth on his own. This was not a child born by Queen Rhaella, and given what happened to Elia and her children, they could not reasonably assume that he was hers either. There's only one reasonable answer, and Oberyn is given all the details of his birth, from Rhaegar's secret marriage to his annulment, and his relationship with Lyanna that resulted in this child. Oberyn states that his brother won't be happy to learn about this. It will be one thing if the boy was just a bastard. Dorne was far more accepting of them. But this child's existence was basically confirmation that Rhaegar had abandoned Elia for another woman and produced a child with her. That's a different story altogether. There would be talks about this, and his brother most likely would be angry at the disrespect done to his sister. But Oberyn assures them that despite this, he does not believe that this would cause his brother to pull his support from Viserys. As angry as he would be with Rhaegar, he would understand that the boy was here through no fault of his own. And as long as Arianne was made queen and they were given revenge, then there should be no issue. So he departs back to Dorne, and the last of the dragons are left to their solitude until the time is opportune. Though when asked by young Viserys about their visitor, the knights decide to keep this a secret for the time being, at least until he's old enough to actually make his move. As the years pass, Viserys takes to his duties well enough. While he can be a bit prone to an outburst here or there, it's clear he has an eagerness to succeed and prove himself. He takes his duties as the oldest seriously, no doubt because of their wise tutelage and his mother's request before she died. He keeps himself together during their exile. Even when Willamdari falls sick sometime into their exile and unfortunately passes on, he's not left worse off. With 3 other knights to look over him and offer steady guidance, he and the rest of his family don't have to worry about living on the streets and struggling just to live. The idea of being a beggar king seems almost ridiculous now. As a result, the last dragons live in a form of pseudo-comfort as they prepare to one day take back their home. As the years pass and Aemon and Daenerys grow, The two of them are near inseparable. Given the short time between each of their births and the connection they shared since infancy, they often appear more like siblings than aunt and nephew. Even more so than Dany and Viserys, some might say. Not that there wasn't a cure between the siblings, but their ages give them different priorities at the time. And this new addition to the family gives Daenerys someone more age-appropriate to bond with, especially since Viserys is constantly being pulled towards his responsibilities as a future leader by the loyal knights. Unlike Viserys, Dany and Aemon have no idea what it was like to be from Westeros, to be raised in the grand halls of the Red Keep, to have a mother and father and thriving family, just to have it all ripped away one day. They are spared the real trauma of it all. As a result, Viserys' time is often spent looking westward, longing for home and plotting his revenge. It's a blessing and a curse, really, as that desire is what drives him to be better, but it also weighs heavily on him as well. Though even with his responsibilities, the oldest of the three still makes an effort to be involved with them. After all, they're all he has left at this point, and he wants them each to know what they're going to be fighting for soon enough. In their youth, Viserys often regales his nephew and sister with stories of House Targaryen, stories about Aegon the Conqueror, his sons, the Dance of the Dragons, and ultimately what life was like for him when he was growing up in the Red Keep, and how great it was before they were forced to be sent away. Though he can be a bit whimsical with his retellings. Luckily, his Kingsguard is around to offer some light corrections here and there when they happen to overhear things. Often, the young man makes bold claims to the younger members of his family, about how he'll return home and slay Robert Baratheon himself, how he'll be a better king than his father Aerys, and an even greater warrior than his brother Rhaegar. Viserys the Vicious, he styles himself, to the amusement of Aemon and Dany, but only time would tell if he would live up to such a name. In addition to these stories, he also tries teaching Aemon and Dany the High Valyrian language, at least what he learned before he had to leave, wanting to strengthen their ties to their ancestry despite being so disconnected from it. The Kingsguard also puts in an effort to find tutors for the children, people who know the language and can actually help them improve. When these talks happen, Aemon is particularly interested when his uncle mentions his father, Rhaegar. He wants to know everything about him, what he did, what he was like, and so much more. Viserys typically focuses on the fact that his brother was a great warrior, the greatest, in his opinion, outside of Sir Arthur Dayne, but his knowledge is limited given how much younger he was than him. Him being little more than a child and Rhaegar being well into his 20s. They spent time together, but not enough, and what he remembered might not have been the most accurate, given how creative the mind of a child could be at times. Though it's fortunate that the son of Rhaegar doesn't restrict his talks with his uncle. He also asks the Kingsguard about his father, and they speak of Rhaegar with a great respect and reverence, though they do point out that while Rhaegar was a great man, he was still flawed, and wasn't exempt from making questionable choices. Even so, he was more than just a warrior. He was noble, valiant, strong, and kind, despite the sadness that hung over him for most of his days. He also liked to sing more than he liked to fight, which surprises all the Targaryens. The young prince also asks about his mother Lyanna when he's given the chance. As much as he takes pride in his Targaryen heritage, there is still a desire to know every part of his family, especially since every day he's reminded that he's not truly like his uncle and aunt. He doesn't have their silver hair or lilac eyes that were commonly associated with the Targaryens. It breeds a certain insecurity in him in spite of the acceptance shown to him by his family. And it makes him eager to understand where he comes from, where he gets his looks. One person he talks to about this with is Arthur Dayne, who can't give Aemon a real in-depth analysis of his mother. He wasn't Lord Stark, nor were any of the other Kingsguard. They may have known and interacted with Lyanna, but they weren't close with her like his northern uncle was. And most of their time was spent guarding her and waiting for him to be born than actually holding a conversation. But even so, they knew some things about her. Arthur tells the young prince that his mother was a bold and kind woman, and though she had not lived long after his birth, she loved him dearly. It's also in these moments of curiosity where Aemon wonders what Winterfell is like. Viserys always talks about King's Landing and Dragonstone, reclaiming what was taken from them, and while he would like to see those places too one day, he often wonders about his mother's home, what it was like there in the north, and what it might be like to meet his uncle Ned. Despite his role in the rebellion, the men of the Kingsguard don't seem to think poorly of him. They actually say he's quite the noble and honorable man. Sometimes he also talks to Dany about this secret wish, though he'll never bring it up with Viserys. While he looks up to his uncle, much like an older brother of sorts, he knew Viserys hated Robert Baratheon. He was always vocal about it, and Lord Eddard was his best friend who helped steal everything from them. So it was safe to say he hated him just as much. Chances are, he'd get angry with him for mentioning the traitor, and that was something he didn't want to risk. But Daenerys doesn't mind these talks, and even says she'd love to go with him to Winterfell if they ever go back to Westeros. But even if they don't, she's still perfectly content staying here across the sea with him, picking lemons from the tree outside their house. After all, this was the only home she ever knew, so she lacked that same drive of her older brother Viserys. Aemon was somewhat similar. He never knew what life was like before, so there was that disconnect as well. But as the only other male Targaryen in the family, and by default the heir to Viserys, he felt obligated to fulfill his duties to the family. And being the only living son of Rhaegar, it seemed to add some weight to that as well. He had to live up to his father somehow, so he took his duties in stride with his uncle as the years passed and they continued to grow. Aemon would be diligent in his lessons. He had a certain talent for swordplay and a sense of duty that the White Knights attributed to his father, Rhaegar. He also had an eagerness to learn, like his uncle, and wasn't shy when it came to putting these skills to work like him. But there were some differences between the two of them. Viserys seemed to get frustrated rather easily, whether it be with the lesson he was being taught, or himself for not picking up on them as soon as he thought he should. In contrast, Aemon was a bit more patient with others and himself, taking the time to reflect on certain things he learned and finding small ways to improve himself where he could. Both were fairly capable in their own right and had their own strengths that the others lacked, though soon enough they would get the chance to showcase their skills as the time to return home drew ever closer. After nearly 2 decades of a somewhat peaceful exile, the wheel of change begins to turn in Westeros. It starts with the death of the King's Hand, Jon Arryn, and the appointment of Eddard Stark in his place, then the gradual breakdown of the relationship between the Starks and the Lannisters that only serves to fan the flames of a future conflict. Everything comes to a head, however, when the king lies on his deathbed after a hunting accident. With his death imminent, moves are made to secure power. Ned sits with his best friend and records his final words before death, though making slight alterations, as none of Cersei's children were actually his. As he records these final words, there is a moment where King Robert considers telling Ned the truth in his final hour, about the nephew he never knew across the narrow sea, how Aemon Targaryen was Lyanna's long-lost son. The topic of the last Targaryens had not been a new one for them. On more than one occasion, Robert had let it be known how much he wanted to be rid of them, though Ned never agreed with him. Though that never stopped him from plotting. And even in his death, his hate of them had never truly subsided. It was never something he truly reflected on, and even now, as he thought back to the truth of Aemon Targaryen and his birth, all he could think of were the dark circumstances surrounding that birth, or what he believed the circumstances to be. It prevents him from feeling truly sympathetic. Every time he thinks of the boy, he thinks of Rhaegar, what he thinks really happened between him and Lyanna. In his mind, it was a vile thing, and it's not something that he can reconcile at all. And because of that, he decides to keep the secret again, taking it with him to the grave. It's an unkind act, but perhaps Ned knowing the truth or not was pointless anyway, as after the death of the king, he tries ousting the Lannisters from power, only to lose his head in the process. So whatever knowledge he might have gained is ultimately irrelevant. Thus, this sparks the War of the Five Kings, as the brothers of Robert vie for the throne. His supposed son tries to keep it, and Robb Stark fights for justice and independence, while others like Balon Greyjoy seek to capitalize on the chaos, to take revenge and power. It's during this time where Dorne remains silent, not declaring for one king or another, that an invitation is sent overseas to the remaining Targaryens. It's time for them to come home, and for promises to be fulfilled, that of a marriage and an army, but perhaps most importantly, revenge. For a long time, Viserys had expected that one day he would marry his sister Daenerys, and keep within family traditions. Even when they were younger, he would tell her that their mother's crown would be hers one day, when they finally returned home. Having had a life of security, he was able to keep what remained of Queen Rhaella and turn it into an heirloom of sorts. Even now as they crossed the narrow sea, he carried the crown with him. And for many years, in fact, especially in moments of doubt, he would hold it. He would think of his mother and believe that some piece of her spirit would give him the strength to do what needed to be done. It's safe to say that it's one of his most prized possessions. The topic of marriage had not been a strange one, and he'd brought it up to the Kingsguard on more than one occasion. Given their situation, it was imperative that he had heirs as soon as possible besides Aemon. But they would always brush it off and say that it wasn't the right time yet, and now he understood why. Gerald Hightower, the oldest member of the remaining Kingsguard, whose hair had slowly gotten grayer over the years, truly making him live up to the name, White Bull, had been the one to inform Viserys of Doran's daughter, and the plan made when he was just a boy. It was a thorough conversation that they had about it, and the Lord Commander had said that while he understood his desire to uphold tradition, the truth was that would not win him the Iron Throne. Men would, and Dorne had plenty of those. Sacrifices had to be made for the greater good. A good king would know that. He also takes a daring step and tells Viserys that sometimes it's also best to leave tradition behind. Before he can take offense to it, the man clarifies that he understands the Targaryens are different. He's not judging their ways, but he remembered when Aerys and Rhaella were married. That had been about duty and tradition, their parents believing it to be some grand service to the realm. But it was also very cruel on the both of them. Aerys and Rhaella held no real love for each other, and things only got worse as the years passed. He didn't want a repeat of that with Viserys, and while anything could be possible with Arianne Martell, he led to believe that things would work out. Elia and Rhaegar were happy enough for a time, until he left her, Viserys then says, which makes the knight pause in silent acknowledgement. Though the young king states that he has no plans of doing the same as his brother. As it stood, he needed Dorne more than they needed him, really. And if he was going to get his throne back, then he would uphold that deal. Unlike Rhaegar, he wasn't willing to throw everything away. Dorne is a place of true wonder for the last dragons, who for the past years have been restricted to Braavos. Dorne and his brother Oberyn received them at Sunspear, which leaves the two youngest of the trio in absolute awe, from the winding walls of the estate and the great golden dome of the Tower of the Sun. If Sunspear looked like this, they could only imagine the Red Keep, if Viserys' stories from when they were children held true. Doran states that it's good to finally meet King Viserys after all these years, lying in wait and him hiding. How he's glad he was able to escape the usurper and grow into what appeared to be a strong young man. Viserys gives a courteous bow and thanks the Prince of Dorne for having him and his family, and aiding them in taking back what was rightfully theirs. Aemon and Daenerys bow as well, and for a time, Doran stares at the younger Targaryen boy. He'd known of him, thanks to his brother Oberyn, but to see him in the flesh like this was something different. It was odd to see his dark hair and know that this was who was born when Rhaegar abandoned Elia for another woman. But for whatever faults the father had, he would not place the blame on the son. As it stood, whatever misgivings he had with Rhaegar, the Lannisters and Baratheons bore the brunt of his ire for what they had done to Elia and her children, and he would see that transgression paid for. But first things first, Doran summons his daughter to the chamber so she may meet Viserys. Almost immediately, there seems to be an interest between the two of them. For Viserys, Arianne is very beautiful, more so than he was expecting, and it catches him off guard. And Arianne thinks similarly, but more than physical appeal, she recognizes Viserys for what he really is, a gateway for her to becoming queen of the Seven Kingdoms. Dorne was great, but the Seven Kingdoms entirely was a different story. Arianne says that it's an honor to meet him, and for the first time in a while, Viserys seems nervous. He stammers for a moment and tries his best to keep his kingly composure. Dany and Aemon find this very amusing. For all his talk of fire and blood and revenge, he was disarmed with a look and a smile. Doran says that they'll have plenty of time to get acquainted with each other in the days to come. But for now, he does wish to go over their plans. This causes everyone to refocus, and the Prince of Dorne goes about explaining the situation. Right now, the realm is in disarray with the death of King Robert and the death of Eddard Stark at the hands of his son, Joffrey. This reveal shocks Aemon and leaves him feeling a bit conflicted. On the one hand, it should be a good thing that these traitors were dead, but Ned had been his mother's brother, perhaps his only chance at really knowing her, and now he was gone. All that talk perhaps going to Winterfell with Daenerys, he wondered if that would even be possible now, or if there was even a point anymore. Viserys also has conflicted emotions, but not the same as his nephew. On the one hand, there's a sense of satisfaction that the people who stole his home are now dead. And then there's a frustration that he wasn't the one who killed them. The realm is in chaos, Dorne continues. Brothers fighting brothers, uncles fighting nephews, a son trying to avenge the death of his father, and so much more. He tells them of the current alliances that have been made, and where everyone seems to be positioned for the time being. With the realm divided this way, it would be much easier for Viserys to make his move on the throne. The young man says he wants to move immediately. Viserys is filled with a new conviction after being home after all this time, and having the Red Keep being so close, and his impatience is beginning to shine through now. He declares that he wants to assault Dragonstone, take back his family seat as soon as possible, and spill the blood of Stannis Baratheon, the one who dared to try and capture him and his family. But Dorne quickly silences this talk. Attacking Dragonstone is not viable, nor is any attack right now. Aside from being a very seasoned commander who wouldn't give up the seat without a fight, doing such a thing would only draw unwanted attention towards Dorne, and they needed to wait before they made their move. Viserys begins to bristle, but Aemon puts a hand on his shoulder, telling his uncle to listen. He didn't have a choice, after all. These were Dorne's men that he was going to ask to fight and die for his crown. Viserys takes a breath and backs off, allowing Dorne to continue speaking and get to the root of his plan. The Prince of Dorne says it simply. No one knows that the Targaryens are here, and they were doing their best to keep that fact a secret. If they attack now, this would attract unnecessary eyes on Dorne, and cause them to expend more resources trying to fight than they would want, as it was guaranteed that someone was going to come for them. It was even possible that some of their opponents might strike a truce to finally be rid of the last dragons once and for all. Waiting was imperative, because it meant that the longer they allowed the other kings to fight, the more resources they would burn, the more men they would lose, and the more enemies that would fall. Let the opposition whittle themselves down, he tells Viserys, and when the time is right for you to rise, Dorne will be left untouched by the violence. Our men will be fresh, ships unburned, and the throne ripe for the taking. There would still be obstacles, of course, but fewer at that point. In the meantime, Viserys would be married to his daughter, and if the gods willed it, they would produce an heir to his throne. A sudden look flashes across Aemon's face at the mention of that, but no one seems to notice, aside from Daenerys, who's been standing beside him the entire time. There is a lot of sense in this plan, but Viserys is still a bit frustrated. He spent almost 20 years waiting to come home, waiting to take his crown, waiting to get revenge for what was taken, and now he was supposed to wait even more. Be content with living and hiding again for who knows how long. This war could take ages, even more years to end. He wants to rage. He wants to fight. He felt like a child, and a coward for letting his enemies weaken themselves instead of crushing them outright while they were strong. He wanted to prove himself, to be strong like Rhaegar. It's what he would have done, and so would Aegon the Conqueror. But as it stood, even he had to recognize that Dorne was the one in control here, and he had no choice but to accept this if he wanted the Iron Throne back. So he relents, respectfully, and Dorne allows his guests to go and rest after their long journey. During this time, Aemon and Dany go for a walk in the water gardens of Sunspear, marveling at just how lavish this place really was. During their walk, Aemon seems a bit distant, and Dany starts to inquire about what's wrong with him. He tries to brush it off, but then she brings up the look he had earlier when they met Doran, and the fact that despite being her nephew, Aemon is like a brother to her, and more than that, he's basically her best friend. She always knows when something is bothering him, and tonight is no different. He couldn't hide it from her when they were kids, and he can't hide it now. It takes some prodding, but eventually he gives in. Back at the meeting, when Dorne had said that Viserys would marry his daughter and with luck produce an heir to the throne, it made him feel jealous and afraid. He knew for a while that it would have happened eventually. Viserys would have to marry. It was his duty as a king. But for his entire life, Aemon had been Viserys' heir, the one who was supposed to succeed him, if need be. But after seeing Arianne and hearing those words, it only seemed like a matter of time before he would be replaced. He'd trained to be a good prince and fit in with the Targaryen family despite his discrepancies. He'd looked up to Viserys and valued his position as second in line. but now he had to face the thought of it being taken away and losing his place in the family. Daenerys then grabs his hand and tells him that he'll always have a place in the family. No one could ever replace him, and Viserys surely wasn't trying to cast him aside or be malicious. He loved Aemon like a younger brother and always looked out for him. She was sure that nothing would change even if he had a child or two. He was still family, and they all needed each other. Besides, Daenerys continues, she was arguably dead last when it came to inheriting the Iron Throne, and she didn't think her life or place in the family was meaningless by any regard, though maybe that's because she hadn't cared for the throne in the same way as her brother and nephew. She would have been content if they stayed in Braavos either way, but the point still stood. Her nephew had nothing to worry about. She plants a kiss on his cheek and tells him that everything is going to be fine, before she heads off to her guest chambers, while he lingers in the water gardens for a moment longer, contemplating the future and what else this war might bring for them. Well, that was a really, really long video, and I did a lot of talking today, and even so, I can tell that I barely scratched the surface of this scenario. So I want your thoughts down below on this, and if you guys give me 1,000 likes, I will come back to this with a part 2. Now, I know I still owe you guys some other continuations for stories I've done on the channel, but for now, if you're feeling this one in particular, let me know down below, and by hitting that like button. But that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I will see you all next time.